When I think of my nostalgia for Tales of Symphonia, I remember it as my introduction to the Tales of franchise. It was once tied with The Legend of Dragoon as my favorite game of all time and has given me many happy memories. From the characters to the story, intrigue, and even the gameplay, it was all something I remember fondly. I also own something like 6 copies of the game because why not? And after rewatching my playthrough, I've decided to place it behind Lost Sphere. Here's why. While playing through the game, I was definitely enraptured in the allure and nostalgia that I had for the game. Despite playing the game for what I assumed to be the 5th time, and doing so approximately 10 years apart from the last playthrough I did, there were still many moments that surprised me. I had a good time with the story and really enjoyed the pivotal moments throughout the game, as they stood out the most. Kratos betraying everyone at the Tower of Salvation was at the top of the list for me, and I remarked it as a top moment in gaming. That said, the story does stumble after these moments, as the journey to Tethe'ala became less interesting with the slowed down pacing. Many scenarios throughout the game didn't feel like they lived up to the first disc of the game, which involved quests with lots of extra steps that hurt the pacing, or having to revisit old locations to progress the story. I also felt as though the game didn't provide ample direction at all times. I found myself lost on numerous occasions, and when reviewing the summary, it was no help at all. I had even encountered a situation where I had to choose between playing the game on air quotes hard mode or restarting the game. In that instance, I opted for the latter. I had also remarked how combat wasn't as enjoyable as I remembered, where I ultimately called it a disappointment. It didn't hold up to the nostalgia that I had remembered. It just felt basic with very little variety to spruce it up. For my final thoughts on the game, I remarked that despite the stumbles, the story did live up to my personal hype. The moments that were fantastic to experience outweighed many of the negatives that held it down, and I ultimately had a lot of fun. In opposition of that though, I had made note that I didn't enjoy the amount of connectivity the game had. It was as though every character we came across had involvement or connection with Crucius or the story, and it felt weird and forced. Party members like Regal and Persea were connected with Varley, who was in turn connected with the Pope, who was working with the Designs. The game seemed to not really explore the motivations or desires of characters without the influence of Crucius, and that stood out to me. For the rewatch, I admittedly thought the game was alright. I think the game goes on a grand journey where there are some nice high points, but it's not a flawless journey. There are many aspects that I didn't enjoy as much, but also some really poor decisions on my past self's part that made the experience less than desirable. For example, I found myself being annoyed by the attitudes that characters had, where they would make decisions that just didn't make any sense. Colette in particular always feeling sorry for her enemies was quite obnoxious for me, as I couldn't fathom why she would feel sorry for Sheena, who was an assassin trying to kill her. There's also the flip-flop nature of Lloyd throughout the game, where at times he's willing to do whatever it takes to help his friends, which include killing, but will turn around later and deny other characters that same opportunity or satisfaction. The whole idea that killing an opponent is wrong, yet Lloyd does so without hesitation throughout the game felt jarring. My past self remarked on how the game could be pretty unclear on how to progress, and I would agree with that. However, I would also have to say that sometimes it was due to my past self not reading the dialogue and going on some grand tangent about whatever YouTube video or project he was working on. It's understandable to be familiar with the game and not feel the need to review the dialogue, but in this case, I was unfamiliar and needed to read the dialogue, but still didn't and got lost because of it several times. It got old very fast. From a viewer perspective, I didn't have any issues with the combat. I witnessed my past self micromanaging characters, or rather Rain, quite a bit though. There's this interesting dynamic with characters where they will perform an action, such as attacking, and then move around. It would predominantly turn into a frustrating thing when Rain is safe at the edge of the battle arena casting healing spells, and then run face first into the boss, where she would then stand there and either cast a spell or run away. Based on memory, I ranked Tales of Symphonia at 12 out of 117, and it doesn't look feasible for it to stay there. This scenario for me is one of those tragic examples of a game creating a launchpad to make games that come after it great, but when looking back on it, it's too outdated. It has a very cool approach to its story, and it's fantastic to experience a journey where our quests get turned on its head, which was really well done. Kratos betraying us at the Tower of Salvation and telling us the world regeneration quest is basically a lie was executed really well. Unfortunately, much of the journey after that isn't as strong, and even some of the journey before it. It will introduce plot devices, characters, and scenarios that feel contrived, and then attempt to have it make sense later in the game, but to less than ideal execution. Mythos, Rodile, Varley, Ewan, the Summon Spirits, and others felt like they could have been meaningful additions to the journey, but just fall flat until it's their climactic moment, where even then it sometimes misses the mark. So, in what may be one of my most controversial decisions, I think Tales of Symphonia comes up behind Lost Sphere. Both of these games have a second portion of the game that isn't as fun as the first and are separated by their combat. I think both stories are interesting, and while I would probably give Tales of Symphonia an edge in that, the rewatch of Lost Sphere was more enjoyable for me and I found myself intrigued in its story more than Tales of Symphonia. For Ni no Kuni Wrath of the White Witch, I struggled to decide how this one would play out, but in the end, while I prefer the monster-catching combat to some degree, Tales of Symphonia's story and narrative development greatly exceed the slight lead of the combat.